Welcome to Tenacious Entrepreneurs, where perseverance meets purpose and every setback is just another step forward. Join us as we dive into the journeys of entrepreneurs who faced failures, embraced change, and emerged stronger than ever. Whether you're dreaming big or already on your way, this podcast is here to remind you that the end is only the beginning. Stay inspired, stay tenacious, and let's conquer the entrepreneurial world together.
Hey, this is Joseph Dupont, and welcome back to the Tenacious Entrepreneur podcast. We're here today with Steve Jordan. He is going to be sharing some highs and lows in business, and I definitely think it's going to be a treat. So I'm looking forward to hearing what all you have to say. Steve, thank you so much for being on the show, brother.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, good to have you. Well, Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. What are you doing now? What do you got going on in business?
Currently, I have these advertising trucks, which you're aware of.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing that for a couple of years, and they're, we do the advertising. We got some clients. We do Baton Rouge mostly, and we're starting to spread out a little bit.
With your son, you have a business with him?
Yeah, we started. My history is that I've been in the software business for a long time. So being in the advertising business is totally different. So it's a whole nother season of life. But yeah, I've been in the software business ever since probably getting out of college.
And so software, and then you could do consulting.
Yeah, I do consulting. I've migrated. We started, if you follow I came out before the PC. So I got into the business whenever it was, just getting started, and I was an accountant. So I used my accounting skills. When I got out of college, I bought 3 stereo stores in Lake Charles. And we bought a PC to put it on computer because I just got out of college. And
what year was this?
This was an 80.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I didn't even know they had computers.
Well, they didn't. Well, the PC wasn't. IBM and Apple had not.
So I
yet.
bought a PC Junior. I got a PC Junior. I said I bought it. I got it for Christmas.
That was a little later.
Yeah.
These were Intertech Superbrain. Okay. So if you can appreciate that name, you probably won't, or North Star. But what we did with those computers is that Peachtree was the software application. And so I said, I bought the Peachtree from my hardware guy that sold me the computer. He knew nothing about accounting, knew nothing about the software. So I learned it myself. And in the initial years, I went out, he would go sell the same package to other customers. And he'd say, hey, Steve can do so I started charging like $50 an hour to do, accounting implementation on his computers. And then I went through that point, and then the Apple had come out with their stuff, IBM came out with their stuff, and I went to work with an Apple IBM dealer selling, PCs with accounting software. And then I did that was in Lake Charles, but you got to remember, this is 80 to 83. And Lake Charles went through a real tough period. People weren't buying computers in Lake Charles. And my wife worked for Conoco, and the Lord led us over to, they would buy our house to move her to Lafayette. Well, we didn't get them to do the house. We sold the house, but we ended up moving all the way to Baton Rouge to take over a MicroAge store and do their customer support. So we opened
a micro what?
MicroAge. It was a franchise.
Okay, MicroAge. Okay.
Yeah. So we did that, and then about 6 months into that gig, Jerry Bracco and Service Paint hired me at Entree, which was an IBM store, to come in and take over the store. It lost a ton of money, and I went in and did a turnaround, and basically got that company going. And then he sold the IBM franchises, and then I stayed with them for about probably 2 years, and then I opened my own company. And from that point, I was doing accounting software.
How old were you?
Gosh, it would be around 80, 88, 89.
So you're like 28, 29?
I'm probably 28 or 29. I had not yet had my kids, so yeah, probably 28, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Well, you had your kids late in life. Then at 28, you don't have your kids yet.
24, I had Chris, but he was. So this would have been before 24. This would have been probably in 85, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay, so it was around 85.
Yeah. So anyway, basically went down that track, and I was a real world dealer. I got the dealership, and at that time you could put the accounting software on what they called Xenix or Unix, or you could put it on a network PC.
Okay.
And so I ended up selling the software, and I would go in there and do the installations and all that. And then I got hooked up. One of my oldest clients is Bernhardt Mechanical, who is Jim Bernhardt's dad, and I put their system in. And then whenever Jim came out and started Shaw, they used my software to run Shaw Group. So that opened up a whole nother world of
Your software. So I mean, like
real world accounting. Yeah.
real world accounting. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's accounting software.
I was a dealer. Yeah.
Okay.
And so what happened there is because of the growth, we did a lot of custom modifications. So I ended up hiring COBOL programmers. I just grew with him. And we had PCs, and actually I made my own PC. I bought the parts and put it together, and we had a Jordan computer.
Okay.
And so, we went down that track with hardware, became a Novell. We had the longest running Novell server at Shaw that serviced the construction side of the business in the country. And then we flipped all that over to Microsoft. And, when Microsoft came out, and I started doing development at Shaw. We did DB2. I don't know if you're familiar with all that, but there's Database 2, DB3, and then Access came out. And so we started writing software and just doing different types of applications with those products. So I got a taste of the development side of the business.
Right.
And so what happened, to kind of fast forward, I went through and I grew the company. It was pretty good size. We did a lot of development. I mean, I had some programmers, and we did some really fantastic stuff. That was way ahead of time. And I got into a scenario with one of my clients. They finance personal injury attorneys. So if they had a big, like at that time,
if they have a big lawsuit, they settle, then you can buy out the settlement.
Yeah. Well, and what they were doing is, like, if you win it, let's say you had a personal injury case, and you came down and you needed money. Well, they would give you the money. They would borrow it from this company,
right?
And then so you would build up, the note, and then when they settled the case, everybody got paid off,
right?
So we wrote the software for that, and it was a paperless system. We could actually go into the law firm. They could write up, just like an F&I for car dealers. Yeah. They could write up the contracts, have the customer, print them out there, have the customer sign it. Everything was electronic. We stored the paper, scanned the paper, and
which was revolutionary, like in that
way ahead of its time.
Way ahead of its time, like it.
And so what ended up happening, fast forward again, and this is really, I guess, what you would call providential. I mean, during that time frame, my faith was growing tremendously. I couldn't get enough of the Bible. I was starting to teach Sunday school. I turned over everything to the Lord and said, hey, guide me, teach me, show me. And what's interesting about the computer business is that you're typically like an air conditioner guy when the air conditioner's out. They hate your guts until you fix it.
Yeah.
And I went through that whole process, and we were running into some really crazy issues, especially with networking. And I would always use it as a ministry. I would tell the people, if I couldn't figure it out, I'd say, look, let me go home. I'm going to pray about it. I'll have an answer for you in the morning. And I'd go home, take a sleep, and sure enough, never failed. I'd have some solution to get these systems going. And it got me to the point to where I realized that just leaning on the Lord to guide all the things that you have, you realize that his engineering capabilities is awesome. But then if you didn't realize it then, you have to appreciate he created the earth. He created me. So there's no engineering that he couldn't do that would be more spectacular than anything you could imagine. So coming to him for a fact that the network NIC, was failing and it was causing the files to corrupt, that was simple for him.
Yeah.
He just had to point me and get me listening to what he was saying. So I was really challenging my life in that respect, and my kids, were young, going through all that time in life. And we had some issues with Tourette's. My son has Tourette's, and, just things like that. And just learning how to have a walk with the Lord, and just deepening my faith and understanding that it's not me, it's him, So, but then as I progressed a little further down the road, the Lord steered me away from what I was doing and got me into paperless. But that transaction is where we talked about, where I had built my business up to the point where I had a whole bunch of contractors, and they did a terrible job on one of the clients, and I didn't pay them. And so the two girls.
Sorry, back off. So Who did a terrible job?
these two contractors that I had that were putting a system in.
Okay, you had two contractors that
Yeah.
you had putting systems.
Right. And everybody that worked for
Because when
me.
you say contractors, you said Shaw. So I'm saying
No. These are software
guys,
consultants.
There were guys that worked for you doing software.
Yeah, but they didn't work for me. They were just contractors.
Just contractors.
Yeah. And so they did a terrible job, so I didn't pay them. So they sued me. And in the process of suing me, they went and turned me into the IRS.
Okay, but 1 second. They did a terrible job. I think I remember you telling me this story. They did a terrible job. They lost all the guys' accounts receivables.
Yeah, and I had to go get it rekeyed.
You had to do forensic accounting, basically, to go back and
recreate everything.
Back into a system. So
Yeah.
So because of that,
Yeah.
you decided, hey, I'm not going to pay these guys.
I'm not paying these guys.
Because they were the ones that were supposed to do it right the first time, which makes sense. I mean, if you bring your car to somebody to repair it and it comes back worse condition than it was, you don't pay them.
Right.
You go to the courts and tell them, hey, I want my money.
Well, and it was to the point to where I thought that they wouldn't have an issue with it because I ended up having to pay somebody else to go fix it. So it was one of those scenarios where, I could have lost a really good client. Right. And, but
so they didn't take it well.
No, they didn't. And we ended up going to court. And the first scenario that happened in court was that they brought me to employment court where they should have brought me to contracts court.
Right.
Well, the court received it. It was a city court judge. And then I had an attorney that was in the office right next door to me that he gave me a lot of bad advice.
Right.
And it was something that I probably should have let the Lord work out, but I decided to go to court. That's one of the things as a Christian, you don't really want a judge to make those kind of decisions. I know it happens all the time, but I did it. I went to court. I was going to fight it, and they won. And they put it like a $35,000, $40,000 judgment on me. Well, at that time, my business was not really doing that great, and I was just kind of limping along a little bit. And then they turned me into the IRS.
How does that happen?
Well, they turned them in and said they're not contractors, but they're employees. So what ended up happening is the IRS came in, did an audit, and said all of your contractors are employees. They're not contractors. So you got to pay the taxes for the last 7 years
on all of your employees.
On all of those employees, which that's where the big number came from.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay.
So
how did they penetrate that? Like because the one case said it was.
It's 941 taxes. They can come get you. You can't walk away from those taxes. That's employment tax.
Okay.
So what ended up happening is I went back to my attorney and told him, the situation. He said, well, I said, I can't pay that. I said, there's no way I'd be able to pay that.
How much was it?
It's like 1.2 million.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was high. And so I told him, I said, there's just no way I would be able to do that. And he said, well, what we can do, says, let's file Chapter 11 because we can get them in as a creditor. And then once we're at the creditor table, the judge will make the decision on how much we owe them. So I took that advice too. And, over the years, I guess when I look back, I probably shouldn't have done that either. But the way the Lord worked was that at the end of the day, I went bankrupt. I mean, I lost everything. I ended up selling out and not
you
even.
went bankrupt because the attorney told you to go bankrupt?
Yeah, because I was in Chapter 11, but I was messed up. Personally, everything was just kind of there. And I had a good friend of mine that we were going to take all my customers and move them into his company. So we're doing everything on the sly, right? And just to try to save everything. And so I did file the Chapter 11, but what ended up happening is that I came back and I did an offer in compromise. And that's something you have an option to do if you're having that, a situation with the IRS.
So, you did it on your own?
I did it on my own.
So, I've heard of Tax Tiger and all those kind of guys.
That's what they do.
That are great. But I thought you had to have an attorney to do an offer in compromise.
You don't need an attorney for nothing. No, I read up on it, just figured out how to do it. But I had called the first.
Now, hold on a second. I know you want to just move fast forward on this, but this is a tool that it can help some of these guys out here.
Yeah.
That you may be struggling with your IRS debt, and you said that you figured out a way. Is there like a resource you just read up on it?
Well, the one definitely. You can go do it today. You could really Google it and understand that you can do your own offer and compromise. The thing that you would learn, the takeaway from this, from that perspective, is that the government does an analysis of what your income is.
Right.
All right. They assume that at that time the Chapter 11 laws were different, and even the 7 laws were different. But they couldn't take your homestead if you were homesteaded. They couldn't take your house. They had to give you enough operating, to pay your bills. And then they had like for food, shelter, there's a couple of things in there and it's all in the documentation. And then what they did is they said, okay, well, you owe this amount of money. We're going to do a 5-year payout and you have this much excess money from what you make. And that's what your balance is going to be times 5. And that's where it came down to $8,000.
It came down from $1.2 million to $8,000 that you owed. That's
Isn't that crazy?
Insane.
But that wouldn't.
But you didn't even have to file bankruptcy then.
I did.
No, but I'm saying like
after the
Yeah, I'm saying like the bankruptcy wasn't a.
I could have probably not.
You could have. You probably without the advice of that attorney.
Yeah.
You probably could have made it through and skated through.
Yeah, because the minute you get the bankruptcy mark, you got 7 years from that point to where you can wash it off. And it just there were some issues that we went to, but the good news about that though is that I quit living on credit because I had to pay cash for everything.
Yeah.
And that teaches you a big lesson.
You became Dave Ramsey.
I became Dave Ramsey by hook or crook. But I went through some really tough times because I had come out of that. And in the 7, I had a few other creditors I had to pay off. Well, I'd moved all my business income to another company, and I was now the CEO of that company. And those payments would come up every quarter that I had to settle the creditor debt. And that was another story. And so,
in hindsight, would you tell somebody that Chapter 7 was a bad idea and you should have just gone straight to Chapter 13 or Chapter 11?
11 and 7 is the two. 11 is a restructure, and I would suggest if you're in a business and you just screwed up by overspending, and when you're an entrepreneur, you go buy your 2500 truck and that has a 4-wheel drive and you jack it up and now your truck note's $2,000 a month and you might go, you just overspend because you're always betting on the if, you think the business is there and it's going to come. But then
I think every entrepreneur can identify with that. They're like, hey, we're at the edge, at the precipice, at the beginning of amazing greatness. If we just have this.
If I just my justification was that I didn't have an office. So I figured if I spent $1,000 a month on a car.
I'm laughing because I had the same argument with my wife.
I figured I'm not paying rent, so I'm going to get me a nice car.
I'm feeling like you're putting your finger in my chest, man. I got a 1-ton truck that I spent $100,000 on.
Yeah, I know.
And my justification is I don't have a big office. Like I got to be in this thing all day. So I can identify, man, where you're coming from. So,
and that's the thing when you start a business is that a lot of times when I got in. A couple of decisions in our life that really affected my entrepreneurial ability to save money was that my wife worked for a bank and she made very minimal money at the bank. And then daycare was at that time more expensive than what she was making. So we made the decision through prayer.
Let her stay home. Yeah.
Let her stay home. Best decision we ever made. But we had our kids in private school. Private school was getting more expensive. We wanted to keep them in Christian schools. So, all of that came on top of me. And in the process of that, I had some really great clients that were just feeding me, and I had a pretty good cash flow. But then we went through a lot of ups and downs. We went through the floods in town, just all of the things that affect your business to where, that you don't have the
income,
the income, but you got all the bills. So now you start robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you got to liquidate. I didn't liquidate. I tried to get the kids out of private school, but thank God I didn't, because that was such a burden. But you got to liquidate, and I just kept getting behind and behind.
So I want to drill down a little bit on that. You got to liquidate. So I remember one time I had a house note due or something that was, and I'd gone through a similar loss like in business, and I was praying about God, we need this. I think it was like $3,800 whatever I had to pay. We need this $3,800. God, we don't know where it's going to come from. How do we get it? And I got this word. He said, "Everything you have need of, I've already provided." And I thought, that's a great platitude, God, but I don't see it. Where is it?
Yeah, where is it?
And he had me go outside of my house. And he got me to walk back into my shed. And sure enough, he was like, you see that table saw that you've had sitting back in that corner for 6 years? You don't need that table saw. Yeah. How about that set of realms? Literally within that day, I put everything on Marketplace and I sold enough to pay the actual note that I had. It broke something in me to make me realize that like being a steward doesn't mean that you don't have to feel guilty that like you're struggling.
Right.
What being a steward means is actually saying, I am going to steward what God's given me. It doesn't mean you have to like make other stuff.
Right.
The word steward is actually, if you go back in the Greek and Hebrew, is talking about actually like a plowshare, talking about like a planter or a farmer, being a good person that raises the crops. Well, you're not responsible to make the crops produce. You're just responsible to plant them and harvest them. And I think that's a great word, man, for guys that are struggling. Is like, hey, you have assets, you have things that you don't even know you have that are sitting back in there. You've had that set of drums since you were in high school, and you hadn't played them in 16 years. It's time to get rid of the drum set.
And you can even go back to the fact that the Lord knows your heart. And if that set of drums was something that you felt like, even if you have to give them up, He's going to give them back to you. And those are the kind of things that we tend to want to take that wheel. That's why we talked about Jesus take the wheel thing. But you want to take that wheel and steer the car. And that's what I was doing through all these events in my life, because I would sit there and pray, but then I would take the wheel and drive. Well, that's why I always come into the thing. I can see Jesus back there crossing his hands going, okay, so you think you can do it better. And I never gave him the ability to use his power to overcome and to engineer things. It's amazing what you can do when you build relationships. And when you build those relationships, like with banks and the people that you do business with, that, don't be afraid to go ask. If you don't ask, you'll never get. And
I find that's the hardest thing, the equity of relationships. To me, like as I've gone through failure and into success, and I've gone back and forth in different areas, as every entrepreneur does. What I've found is like the guys that I thought were my friends weren't necessarily my friends. They turned on you, started doing like the jackal and getting you. And then the guys that I didn't have any idea that they were going to be the loyal, most good guys in my life. Those were the guys that like came up and supported me. I had a friend I got mine that I was mentoring, and I remember when I was going through all this struggle and dealing with it. He's actually now like one of my best friends, but I got like $5,000 from him to pay something or whatever, and I was feeling bad. I was like, man, I ended up not having the money to pay him back. I thought I was going to be able to pay him back quick, and so I went to him and said, hey, I'm really struggling. I don't know what to do. And he said, no, we gave you that. Don't worry about it. We didn't look at it as a debt. And had I not gone to him and actually talked to him, I probably would have just avoided him and never called him again, and never, what I'm saying? That's the old Joey. Would have just been like the Jacob deceiver. But instead I just went to him and said, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. And he forgave that debt. And it was the beginning of a tremendous relationship. Even to this day, like he's one of the guys that's one of my key men in business, because I never forgot that. I made sure that I'm always going to support the guys that are going to support me. And they're not all around you. Like it's hard to find when you got a lot of money.
And the devil plants people too. You the thing about how deceiving he is that you get to a point sometimes where he can even deceive you, by not letting you allow Jesus to be in your heart and to take control. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. If I were to give advice to somebody that's, in as an entrepreneurial opportunity, is that, like I know one of the things we were going to talk about was what one event actually, did X, and when you're an entrepreneur, every day's an event. When you wake up in the morning, you the ball stops with you. If you work for somebody, you can pass it backwards or pass it up to your managers or whatever.
Right.
But when it's you, the ball stops with you. So every day is a challenge. Some days are really great because you make a big sale or you get a good contract, and some days are like, hey, I can't pay payroll. And that's what you face. And my son always tells me, and he's in business too, and he runs our software company, and what's interesting about everything is that what do you call it? Is mailbox PTSD. is that you're the first one to get the mail when you see the mail lady drive by, because you run out to the mailbox to see if you got any checks in,
Oh yeah.
And that's just the way it is. And if you want to step out on the plank and become an entrepreneur, and there's a personality that you have to have there, but the main ingredient of that is that if you allow Jesus to take the wheel and to point you in that direction, all your decisions are going to be made, and they're going to be blessed. Because even if you make bad decisions, he's gonna chasten you. Maybe he might put you in
Timeout.
Put me in timeout for a while. But he's gonna bring me back, because the one, I guess, thing that I believe in is that he takes care of the birds. He takes care of he's gonna take care of us.
Yeah, I think the thing I had to. It's hard. So I've been an entrepreneur all my life.
Me too.
I've never. I worked for somebody like once, but I'm not a really great employee. I have a tendency to want to be like.
I'm not a good employee at all.
They'll come in and I'll rearrange the whole room, and like, the workflow is wrong, and now we're going to put the paper over there.
I'm not a great employee.
Yeah, I'm not a great employee, but the one thing I figured out, man, was that as an entrepreneur, you have to have confidence in yourself.
Right.
But that can be our greatest strength and our greatest weakness, because we are self-dependent. We become relying on ourselves.
Right.
And so when you rely on yourself and you don't put God in the center of it, then when stuff fails, you only have one person to blame.
Yeah.
It's yourself. And so we have a tendency to inward focus, and we are our biggest critics.
Yeah.
And that's where guys end up committing suicide and everything else, is because they just self-inflict,
right,
because they've built their whole business on their self-ability instead of building the business on God's ability.
Right.
Like, you and I, like you're 65 now, right?
66. Yeah.
66. I'm 54. We both got gray hair, and we've both been down the road a little ways.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, when I was in my 20s, I could just figure it out. I remember God told me one time, he said, "You got more moves than Jacob." Like
Yeah.
I keep putting my finger on you, and you get out from underneath it.
Keep
I
kicking
put my
the ball.
finger on you, and you keep getting out from underneath it, and put my finger on you.
Yeah.
And he said, "Fine, I'm gonna put my hand on you, and you're gonna stop, boy, and listen to me." And I can tell you, I remember the time where, as I was a believer, I loved God. I had Him in my business. I prayed every day in my business. It wasn't like but I didn't really give Him control. Whenever I got to the point where I realized that God wanted to be my senior partner, He didn't want to just be my janitor.
Right.
The guy that cleans up behind me. Hey, you mess up on aisle 7.
Yeah.
We got to get this bill paid. What do we do?
Yeah.
He wants to be the one to make the decision. And then if you allow him to, it takes a lot of slowing down to do this. Like, it's hard to slow down and let God make the decision, because you have to ask God, and then you have to listen. And it might take you a week to get an answer, whereas we like to be in the moment, make the decision, do this, do that, do this, do this. We know where we're going. And I'm telling you, man, like in that focus, that introspect now, looking back on it in my life, whenever I made that move to get out of the driver's seat and get in the back seat, and not be a backseat driver. Hey, God, you missed that turn. Slow down. Speed up. Good. Learn to be like, oh, no, I have to rest. I can take a nap in the back seat now, and then just be like, okay, God, let me know when we get to the destination we're supposed to go. You and I met, and I mean,
that's a God thing.
But I'm saying, like, when we met, just not a couple weeks ago or so, we met. The funny story is that my son asked me to go drive my truck to pull his float in the parade. We were doing that parade, and I honestly didn't want to do it. I was like, hey, I don't want to go to the parade. It's going to be, he told me we had to be there at 4, and it was going to be till 7. And I was like, I've never seen a parade take 3 hours. What do you mean 4 to 7? I'm thinking, and my wife was like, well, are you really going to go? And I was like, well, I promised him I'd go. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be a man of my word. I'll go. And I remember I got there, and I thought, well, Lord, maybe there's an assignment here. Maybe somebody I'm supposed to witness to, or I don't know. But nothing spiritual was coming out of it. And then I just happened to see you pull up in your sign truck, and I've been meaning to talk to you. So I went over there and introduced myself, and we ended up hitting it off and being good friends. And man, I feel like that I've known you all my life now, just a short period of time.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, because you know the story about the signs,
Right.
because that's just was totally out of what, what I was, my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I ended up having the trucks, which is a miracle. I don't know. I would have never bought the trucks in the first place. But the funnier part of that is that how it came down. I always question. I say, well, God, why do you put me here? I'm mature enough now in my faith that it's a daily walk, and I say I give God the glory for the goodness and the good and the bad, the ugly, everything that happens,
Yeah.
So I really feel like I've surrendered, I guess, and I've built patience and perseverance, which is part of what you were talking about there. And whenever I got involved in these trucks, I'm like, why am I here? Because I really had a path that, I wrote my book and I wanted to get on a speaking campaign, and I started writing my novels and all that. And I really was getting into that part of life, and I was liking it. And then it just went full stop. And I was sitting there going, I'm writing these Christian-based books, that I want to spread the gospel through my ministry. And it was, people were reading my fan fiction stuff and all that. And it was just interesting because I get into the trucks and say, well, why you put me here? So I do the same thing. I'm looking for the opportunity. Why? The glory in Jesus is when he's put you in front of something and you're just reacting to that and doing his will. And then you realize, oh, that's why I'm here. And one of the O's, the first O was that my ex-partner had a lot of problems. And basically he was seeking, and through that process, he got saved. He quit drinking and quit gambling. I think he has a baby now. But then he brought me to you.
But I think that if you think about it, like if we go and I mean, just segueing off that, I think if we go into the understanding that, I remember I was talking to God one time about financial stuff, and he said this to me, and it was so interesting. He said, we don't have a financial problem in heaven. And he said, the streets are paved with gold. The doorknobs are made of diamonds. We don't have a problem in heaven with finances. We said, we have an integrity problem in heaven.
Yeah.
And he said, Joey, if you wouldn't have walked through this trial, you wouldn't have been in heaven. You would have never made it up here with me.
Yeah.
Because your character was so out of line with what I wanted you to do that your character will stop you from entering heaven.
Yeah.
Unforgiveness and hatred in my heart for other people and bitterness and things that I'd built up that I had to walk out. And I could tell you, man, like that movement, I've had the favor of God on my life pretty much all my life. When I went through the catastrophic failure in my business, I literally felt, I would call it the anti-favor. It wasn't just that God lifted his hand off me and favor wasn't there. It was like I was despised. All of a sudden, everything that I received access and opportunity and everything, it was like, what happened, God? Like, where am I? What's going on? And it was because I was actually in your position where I was traveling and speaking. I was traveling around the world, and I had opportunity. I just spoke in a conference in Brazil with, like, I think it was about 5,000 people there. It was a pastor's conference, and I was speaking to the business leaders. And I remember, like, the message that I was giving was talking about God gives the ability to create wealth. There's a Joseph anointing on you. There's people here that are supposed to give to the kingdom, and they're the sowers that are going to give to the priests that are supposed to be there, the kings, and they're going to give to the priest, and they're supposed to have this. And it was a good message. But what God showed me was, he said, you were teaching self-reliance and you were building up pride. And the future of that was where Satan's at. You were going to bring people down a road that led them to a place of pride to think, I have the ability to create wealth.
Yeah.
And he said, I had to stop you to get you our attention, to understand that. Yeah. And God actually took me through the book of Job and got me to where were you whenever the Leviathan, do you remember the clouds and the storehouses in heaven where all the snow is kept? Have you ever looked at the thunder? Like all this stuff, like he brought me through it to understand that, like, I reign on the just and the unjust. I do what I want to do. I'm sovereign. I'm not your go-to Santa Claus. I'm God. I'm sovereign. I'm in charge. And if I choose to reign on you, then you can be a good steward. If I choose not to, you can be a good steward too.
Yeah.
You know, I remember I had this, and I've told this story before on the podcast, but you haven't ever heard it, so I'll tell you. I was going through a real bad time. I'd lost my business. I was struggling. I was like every entrepreneur. I was ready to make my name. I was a millionaire that I lost everything, and then I was ready to be a millionaire again. And so I was like, hey, second time is a lot easier than the first time. So I was working 16 hours a day, like building websites and doing stuff to try to get. I was going to work for building businesses, and I remember I had this guy Tracy Kelly. He's actually here. He's my production manager now. He actually is a guy that puts this show together for me. Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate you keeping us all on point. But he's the reason why we actually have the show. But I remember he called me and he said, man, let's go to lunch. Well, I'd mentored him. I'd helped him, watched him give his life to the Lord. And he was somebody that I, really had a strong relationship with. And I was like, dude, I can't go to lunch, man. I'm dealing with India and China and Pakistan and all these different places building out all this technology. And I was like, I can't go to lunch. He's like, well, you got to eat. I was like, okay, man, I'll go eat. But I was in military school mode. Like I knew how to eat in less than 5 minutes. I could eat, dude. So I went there with that mindset of I'm just gonna wolf this food down, shake hands, be friendly, and then leave. I'll be back in 30 minutes. I told my wife, I'll be back in 30 minutes. Well, Tracy ended up, coming, inviting the lady that was there. Her name was Winnie, over to the table, and he said, Winnie's a Christian business person, but her business is struggling, and she thought she could use some help. I thought you might encourage her, and I thought, well, I can tell her how to go out of business. I don't know what I'll encourage her with, but I just asked some flippant questions like, hey, do you guys pray together? And she's like, well, no, my business partners, I got two of them, they're Buddhist, and they don't pray, and they hate God, and whenever I mention Jesus, they spit on the ground. And I said, okay. And I said, well, I tell you what we'll do. I said, I'll come here every day for the next 30 days, and I'll pray with you. And I thought, when I said it, I thought, who said that? I don't have my time to be here. I'm not coming here for 30 days to meet with you and go into all this stuff. But because I said it in front of Tracy, I couldn't back up. I had to
be accountable.
I had to be accountable because Tracy was going to hold me accountable. He was like, "Hey, what are you going to do, brother? We're gonna go, aren't we?" And so I ended up, going ahead and going the next morning. And I called some of my guys. I had 3 or 4 guys that still were like loyal to me, and I called them and said, "Hey, man, we're going to go pray for this lady." And when I got there and we prayed, I remember the prayer. Like, number one, you got to remember, she had 2 Buddhist business partners that didn't want to. They spit on the ground when they heard God's name. I called everybody together for a meeting that morning, and now she said she wanted to meet at 10 o'clock in the morning. For me, that was a horrible time. Like I was dealing with India and Pakistan and China, and I would wake up in the morning and start working at probably like 4 o'clock, going into like 10 o'clock was sort of like my middle of the day when I was still really hard into telling people what to do. So I had to just like not even do that. I just gave that part up for a little bit for 30 days. And I remember I got there and I called them all together and I said, I feel like that the Lord, we're consultants. And I said, we're coming here to try to help your business succeed because you're about to close. And we believe that Jesus is the source of success, and that there's only one path to freedom, and there's only one path to success in your business, and it's through Jesus. And I could see their eyes rolling in their head, and they were. And I said, hey, we're going to pray with you guys for 30 days, and we're going to give you everything we know how to do to help your business succeed. But if after 30 days God doesn't do this, I'm committing to you, we'll come back for the next 30 days and pray to Buddha or whoever else you want to pray to, because Jesus isn't real. And when I said that, dude, I felt like Elijah standing at the prophets of Baal, saying, challenging, and it energized me so much, man. And we prayed, and in the next 30 days, it turned their business around. They actually succeeded and were able to the business partners wouldn't sell out. They refused to sell. But then one by one after about 10 days came to her and said, look, I can't do this every day. Like I can't be around this. Like I'm going to sell my portion to the other Buddhist.
Yeah.
And then that Buddhist, after another 10 days, said, I don't want to be involved in this. I can't deal with this anymore. She said, I'll sell it to you on time. I'll sell you my portion on time. They ended up both being bought out. Her husband was working in New Orleans at the time at a high-end sushi restaurant, running the sushi restaurant, and didn't have enough money to bring her down. Well, within that year, we actually started a Bible study there that met every week. Within that year, we saw it completely change and turn around. She paid off all of her partners and got them out of the business. She moved her husband down. They were able to continue the business and grow it. Completely transformed that business, and they're actually selling it right now. They're actually putting it up on the market and selling it. This is probably what, Tracy, 10 years later, 15 years later. It's been a long time. It's probably been 10 or 15 years, but they put it up for sale. And I remember I called a guy. I won't say his name, but I called a guy that had gone through a catastrophic. He lived in CCL, Country Club, Louisiana, and he had lost everybody's money. You probably know him if we're talking about it. But he was somebody that in that Bernie Sanders type stuff lost everything. He was just a manager, but everybody looked at him as the one that they trusted. And I remember I called him and I said, man, I figured out the solution, dude. Like, we don't have money anymore, but we have something so valuable as our time and our ability to be able to help people. I said, if you find somebody worse off than you and lean in and help them, God's going to pull you into his bosom, and he's going to give you like success like you've never seen. And I granted, this was the first day. Didn't have success. I felt this for the first time. I can honestly say I felt hope. I realized that was the day that I put God as a senior partner. It was no longer in control. It wasn't me. It wasn't I that was living up to all of these things and going to make it.
Yeah.
I put God as a senior partner. I looked at him and like, what is his priority? It's people. It's not money. And so I reached out to that person, and this guy said something to me. He said, I don't care about that, Joey. I just care about Whiffam. I said, what? What's Whiffam? He said, what's in it for me?
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's your. I realized that we were on two different paths. But from that day on, that really was the trigger for me that pulled me out of that dark hole, was finding somebody worse off than me. And I can tell you guys, if you're an entrepreneur and you're struggling and you're really suffering in business, I challenge you. Find somebody that's worse off than you. Not financially that you go give them money, because that's not going to be the solution. You might go to a soup kitchen. I don't care if you go, serve on the weekends cleaning up trash, but find somebody else that's worse than you and sow into their life. And I'm telling you, you're going to reap rewards that are just so tremendous. Since that moment, God's favor went back on my life. I feel like it just was like almost like a hand of God that was placed on my life. From that moment on, I've walked in favor, and that's just the key. I think is finding your place of favor and finding understanding that God's got to be senior. He's got to be in control, and look to Him to actually make good decisions and bad decisions, whatever they are. But so you made that decision to go bankrupt and you lost all the stuff and ended up settling for $8,000.
Yeah, that was a walk. That was something that we look back on that and just all the blessings that you had during that time frame. With people that helped you out when you needed help, and then
you found your real friends.
You found your real friends, and the other side of that coin too was that the cyclical aspect of the business. One of the things that I guess it taught me. I chased that dollar for a long time.
Yeah.
And I realized that, the aspect of like the rich man parable in the Bible, if take the money out of it, what was his problem? And it was self-reliance, that people that can be self-reliant typically lean that way, and they see God as just a factor in their life. And if they're Christian, they may accept Christ as their Savior, but they don't surrender the fact that if you really put your control, if you really give Him, like you're saying, that control or do the obedient thing that He wants you to do, once you find that pathway and you follow that pathway and you have the Lord follow that pathway, I'm going to write this book. It's called The Joy Barometer, and I teach it in my Sunday school class. And what it's all about the fact that if you don't have joy, then you're probably not in God's, I'll use your word, favor, or you're off track. Because once you're on track, your joy gets high. So if you're helping somebody, like in your case, and you see the benefits and the fruit that gets born from that, you're in his favor. So your joy just becomes much more, you get more out of it than they do, because you feel like, hey, this is a success. You think about, one of the things I wrote down in y'all's questionnaire thing was that, if you look at the Christian faith, you have to appreciate the fact that, Jesus in the Trinity was in the beginning, and anything that was made, which is what in John, he made, because he's God,
right.
So when you walk through that process and you realize that they have foreknowledge, they understood, and we look at where we're at today, having this podcast in this great room, and you recognize the fact that there were Jesus and 12 disciples that started all this.
Yeah.
It was planned in the very beginning, but it manifested itself, and God picked people, and people that were willing to be obedient and have faith. If you look at Hebrews, the chapter 11, the faith chapter, it's all about faith. It has nothing to do with about works or any of that other stuff. It's about having faith and surrendering to God and saying, hey, this is it. Well, when Jesus came along and you had the 12 disciples, all of them met a terrible death,
right.
But yet they are the foundation. And all of their events, like if you go through the New Testament and you read it from a standpoint of saying, I want to build my business, how should I be? Well, Jesus was the best manager, but because he was the best servant. He washed his disciples' feet.
Right.
He put himself in a position to say, I can help you. I want to help you. He knew the challenge that the disciples were going to have. And if you look at the disciples, they also knew too that it was going to be a challenge. So everybody that they mentored, and as they passed the way became Christianity and all that, all of that stuff that went down the line, when you recognize and look at that from a standpoint of your own business or your own really life, but if you look at it from building a business, you can glean so many great things from that. And it's all about the ministry of Christ. When you do things, in my business, we did we started River City.
Yeah.
And
River City Church.
Yeah. And I want to shout out to Al Jones, got buried today. He's one of the two people who affected my life. And one of them was in Lake Charles at Milton Hickson. And Al Jones was a Sunday school teacher that did. And he passed away this last week. But
I'm so sorry to hear it, brother.
Well,
I know having your heroes die before you is tough.
Yeah, but you know what? It's one of those things.
He graduated, huh?
Oh God, he when he got to heaven, he just, when Jesus comes to you and said, job well done, my good and faithful son. He's that kind of. He's not a father-in-law too. He just, he touched so many. He started Dunham School.
He was your father-in-law, okay?
No, he wasn't my father-in-law. He's just Al started Dunham School with a bunch of guys. And they started Dunham, and look at what that turned into be. We started River City, it became Cross Point, But Al touched so many people. And I told Mary Gaden, his wife, at the funeral home, I said, Mary Gaden, I said, the one thing about Al that just, when he would read a scripture and he liked it, he'd pause and he'd go, and you could tell that it just bathed himself in that scripture. And, that's the thing that if you can get to that point in your relationship with Christ, and you apply that to everything that you do, then you treat adversity differently. Yeah. You treat failure as not being a failure. It's just a stepping stone to success. And the fact that you start leaning on Christ, recognizing that especially in today's world, there's so many mental issues. It's funny. I'll give you a quick story. I have diabetes. I go to my doctor every quarter, and they just started doing this. But you'll go see them, and y'all may have experienced it if you've been to the doctor. The last question, the last question they ask you after they key all the stuff in the computer?
No, what?
Are you struggling with any mental issues? So the last time they asked me that, I said, you know what? I really am. And I'm starting to go down. And this little nurse is like, whoa, you need to tell that to the doctor. She didn't want to tell. And I said, I'm just picking with you. But,
Yeah, I feel like what they should be able to say is like, we should have an Entrepreneurs Anonymous. Yeah. Say, my name's Joey and I'm an entrepreneur.
And I'm an entrepreneur. But anyway, the mental side of that is the fact that, when you have all these adversities that are coming at us, whether you look at the politics of the world or the world itself, and you see that pendulum is just swinging back and forth, but we're all on a pathway to destruction, because that's what the Bible says, and unfortunately we'll be raptured out of here before all that happens. But when you sit down there and you recognize that you have this ability to tap into a power source that's built into you when you become a child of God.
It's a secret weapon.
It's a secret weapon.
Yeah,
and
it's not fair to other people.
Yeah.
I actually made T-shirts called "Favor Ain't Fair."
It's not.
It's not, man. It's just not fair how much favor God puts on us.
And he the fact that God doesn't give you more than you can handle, but like we talked about this too. I get visions and understandings every night. When I sit down there, I can look at a situation and determine the success of it. And God's given me that spiritual gift. It's administration, being able to solve problems and things. And that's what, when I go to work with my customers, generally speaking, they have a problem that I can solve for them.
Right.
And they're Christian. I always make the comment. I come in and I say, what's your faith?
I think that's MC Hammer made that one. You got a problem, I'll solve it.
Yeah, that was it. But what's funny about how all that works out is that when you tap into that source and you realize that, you start really recognizing you're not alone, which is typically a mental thing, that a lot of people that are secular, they don't understand that you can overcome just about anything, or you can overcome anything. There's nothing more powerful than what we have built into us.
Right.
And even to the point of where, if it's alcoholism or pornography or committing suicide or whatever the case may be, and sometimes that devil just, you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
It's too much for you.
Yeah.
But if you tap into that source and you fight the battle, you're going to be rewarded. And if you can't, I believe Jesus takes you out. I think the Bible tells you that.
I think what's super important to me, man, is like finding your support system early. I think in life, like there's only a handful of people that I can think of that have been in my support system that I go to and I lean on. The guys that you can actually be honest with and tell them what's going on. And I see so many men that are just like isolated. They're like alone. And so whenever they start going through it, you don't want to wait until you're in the middle of a problem, because the first thing you think as a guy is, I don't want to bother somebody else with my problems. Like this is, this just going to bother them. But if you can just sew into getting relationships with guys, that's part of what we did on the Christian Businessman's Luncheon that we started, was we developed like a room of men that said, hey, look, we want to do life together. We're not just going to sit here in this room and just sit around a table and talk. Like, we want to get to know each other. We want to go on retreats together, and just we want to be men that actually hold each other accountable. And I think that, man, that's so important. Is I would challenge whoever's out there that's an entrepreneur, find godly men to be around. I don't care if it's at your church. If you don't have it at your church, they don't have businessmen's luncheon, or they don't have any kind of men's network. Find one. Start one. Get into one.
Yeah.
But you may not be the guy that can lead a group, but I mean, I'm just telling you, man. Like, there's millions of entrepreneurs out there that are struggling. Sure. Men and women. I mean, I just identify with the men's side of it, but there's entrepreneurs that are struggling. Yeah. And they have nobody that's actually reaching out and saying, hey, I really want to see what's going on in your life. Yeah. And I just that's for me, man. Like, I think your word of the day would be, look for advisors, for godly men like this guy that just passed. Tremendous man in your life. But I guarantee you could call him at midnight and say, man, I'm struggling.
Yeah. What's really interesting about that too is that in my lifetime, I've got a lot of folks that I can go to and talk to that are faithful enough to where I can unload on them. But I tend to be a little bit more reserved. I will say this about being an entrepreneur, since this is kind of the subject that we're talking about, is that I like the plank. I like being out there. Yeah. Because I don't have fear out there. Right. If you don't have that relationship, or you have that fear, you don't need to be an entrepreneur. And what ends up happening is that there's 95% of the businesses that get started that are non-franchised typically fail. So the odds are against you. But if you like that plank and you've got Jesus by your side, then he's going to walk you through, and you have that faith and you let him guide you, your chances of success are going to be way better. And you won't fall into that 95% bucket that's everybody talks about,
Well, I tell people all the time, it's like there's entrepreneurs and there's entrepreneurs. There's guys that are actually entrepreneurs, and they're generational. Yeah. But the guys that are not entrepreneurs, they're just rebellious.
Yeah.
They don't want to work for somebody else, and I can identify them. Like just a guy that's
me.
I'm saying like all entrepreneurs don't want to work for somebody else.
Right.
But I'm saying like if your motivation is just that, then you're a 35-year business that is just one plumber working by himself.
Yeah.
And it's great. You're a small business owner. You're the backbone of America. You're important. But that's not the person I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is a guy that finds a need and fills a need, and he's constantly starting businesses and constantly, moving things. Like he sees things differently than regular people see them, and he doesn't even know it. But whenever you sit down and start talking to other people that aren't entrepreneurs, it becomes very clear very quickly, because they're like, well, you're struggling with this, just go work for Exxon.
Yeah.
What are you doing working doing this? Like, and you're like, you don't understand. I don't even there's no path.
Yeah.
In my mind, I don't even understand how to go there. Like it doesn't make sense to me. It's like asking me to, sing opera. I can't sing opera. I'm sorry. I don't know how to.
Right.
And I can't learn it. You know what I'm saying? So it's just, I don't have that talent. But I do have the talent of entrepreneurialism.
Yeah.
And so,
but don't you think, though, too, with entrepreneurialism, and we were talking about this earlier, too, is we're all kind of consultants,
Yeah.
And it is about filling that need. What I like to do is, like, I remember when we used to first sell accounting software, I'd go to these flower shops, and they would handwrite those statements every month, right?
Yeah.
Well, then I'd put them on computer, or I'd put their payables on computer, or whatever it was. And then I'd get them to pay me with a check. And when I'd get that check in the mail, it was a reward that I had that, hey, I did a good job. And they got the benefit of the fact that it doesn't take them 10 hours to get their bills out or their checks out and all that. And, I've taken that same aspect and I said, that's that's the ingredient that God gave me. That's that plug-in that, I'm the guy that I see it. Like my father was in a wheelchair. So, I mean, he passed away and I took care of him for about 6 years. And, when I see an older person, like at the Parkview games, I'll see them coming up the stairs and, they're struggling and their daughter's standing next to them talking to their buddy, and they don't realize that mama, who's 70 years old, is having trouble climbing up the stairs. So I'll go down and help them up. And I have that passion for that because I feel like I filled that need. And I do the same thing in my business, is that when I go in, I always tell people, look, if you don't think you had value for what I give you, don't pay me. Because I don't ever want to have a situation where a person hasn't, that they don't see any value in what I give them. My goal in life, and I did this when I was 60, I wanted to re-engineer myself because my son pretty much took over everything. He took it into another area, and I didn't have that part of my life. I was rolling out of another position with the old software. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna re-engineer myself. I see my buddies playing golf every day. I love golf, but I don't like it that much.
Yeah.
So and being an entrepreneur, we love what we do. It's my passion of life is to do that, not to go play golf, although I like to play golf, but it's to solve problems. So when I started writing my books, I said, you know what? I want to spread the gospel. I've never been one. Like when you sit down, I'm not an outward praying person, even though I teach a Baptist Sunday school class, and I'll pray out. But, in my faith, I came up as a Lutheran. You did that. That's a very personal thing, is prayer. And so, going through that whole process of trying to spread the gospel is not something I'm really comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem sitting down with somebody who I'm talking with and talk about their faith and say, hey, it looks like, are you a Christian? I'll ask that question all the time because sometimes that determines whether or not I want to do business with them or not.
Right.
Because, I really feel like my spiritual gift is to be to solve that person's problem. And the only reason we're together is because Christ put us together.
Well, if we look at life as God looks at life, we miss the boat if we don't understand that God sees people. Mm-hmm. He sees souls. He doesn't.
Right.
All he looks like, he
It's
looks
win
at
or
money,
loss.
but he looks at money just like he looks at seeds to sow in the ground, or like he looks at trees, or
Yeah.
like he's like souls, soul. So
Yeah.
if we can get in the mind of Christ, we can start seeing that people are the biggest, like the highest priority. Your
Yeah.
highest priority. Like if you're blowing through life and you're a painter and you're painting somebody's house, and the husband is screaming at the wife and she's bawling, crying, and they don't know what to do, and you just keep painting, you're failed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if you're a multimillionaire.
Yeah.
You failed. You need to go sit down with that man and say, man, let's go get some coffee.
Yeah.
Let's talk. I'm going to sow my time into you to be able to help you grow, as a man. I want to help show you like the right pathway here. And not everybody will receive it. You may say that to the guy and he says, well, who are you? Get out of my house. I don't want.
Yeah.
That's okay. Be willing to lose a job. But don't ever leave a soul hurting in your
Yeah.
wake. Like if you do, I feel like that's going to be the things that God's going to play on the big screen in heaven. It's like, oh, here was.
Yeah. This is what you did.
This was your opportunity. This waitress came up to you,
Yeah.
and she was about to commit suicide. Her mom just, died
and
of
you
cancer.
missed it. Yeah.
And you were screaming at her because your steak was undercooked.
Yeah.
And she went back in the back with all of and who are you? You're a representative of me.
Yeah.
We're ambassadors of Christ. And so we as believers, we're responsible.
Right.
It's not a suggestion, it's a command.
Right.
He didn't say, I suggest you go into all the world and preach the gospel. He commanded them, go into all the world and preach the gospel, making disciples, and then teach the disciples how to live.
Yeah.
And so if we're following Christ and we're going to say we're going to do what the disciples did, we should be making disciples.
Yeah.
We should be finding people in their need. And I'm telling you, if you focus on filling a need in somebody's life, the Bible says you'll have all sufficiency and all things abound to every good work. If you just look to fill the need, look to do what God wants, be in God's kingdom, work for God, and I guarantee you, you're going to see the path come clear in your eyes on how to make money.
Yeah.
Because then he looks at you as one of his workmen, right?
Yeah.
He says, you're working for me. Well, God doesn't stiff his workmen. He pays us. You know what I'm saying? He makes sure we have sufficiency. He makes it. He doesn't say they're going to have all abundance. He says, well, I'll have all sufficiency. We'll have everything we ever need of.
Yeah.
And
Take care of you.
I can tell you there was a time where I thought I was going to lose my house. I was everything. I think I told you the story, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was going to lose my house. Everything was gone. I didn't have any way to recoup it, and I'd done everything I could do. I more moves than a Swiss watch, man. I tried this big loan. I tried that loan. I tried going to individual. I mean, I did everything but going to loan sharks. I mean, I just finally told my wife, okay, well, we're going to lose the house. Like it's coming. The auction is going to be on this date, and we need to start looking where we're going to move a mobile home somewhere, and we're going to survive. My wife goes to the mailbox and she comes back and she's crying, and I'm like, what? It can't be any worse. Like, we're losing our house. Like, what else did you get? This bad news? Because the PTSD mailbox. And she came back. She said, "You're not going to believe this. We got a letter from the bank. We got approved for a loan we didn't apply for. With the bank that was foreclosing on us, they modified our loan, made it a 40-year loan. We went from paying $3,800 a month down to $1,600, and they gave us a check.
Yeah.
And the check is enough to cover all of the arrears that we owed, and now we just have to send that in, and we're covered."
Yeah. Can't you? That's the message that you want to pass.
Yeah.
Is it not only is it that message, but what was it? 429 years between the last chapter, the last book of the Old Testament, till Jesus came to Bethlehem. That was a prophecy. Not 428, not 430, not it was that many times. And how many times and how many stories have you heard from faithful people that were at the end of their rope, and when God provided, He provided just enough.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I feel like in my case, because I had to be chastened to rely on Christ that much. I had to be whipped I had to be thrown into the mud. He had to say, quit being self-reliant. Quit thinking it's all you.
Yeah.
It's not me. And when the hardest times when you're in the valley, because when you're on the hill, you think, oh, yeah, I'm gonna buy that $100,000 truck, and I'm gonna get, And a lot of times entrepreneurs get into that mindset, and they're not humble enough to understand that, hey, I went through. One of the worst economic times I went through was 9/11.
Yeah.
When they, because there was so much uncertainty about our country, and that nobody wanted to buy anything, and everybody was cutting back, and my revenue went down 50%. I had the other scenario in Lake Charles where I had those 3 stereo stores. I was so proud of the 3 stores that whenever the economy tanked, when Jimmy Carter, this was before your time, but you think that,
I remember Jimmy Carter. My dad was in the RV business.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I had $1.5 million on loan back in that day in '80, and it was at 22% interest.
Yeah.
When I started it at 8, and I was 2 points over prime, and that's what, and then the Conoco went on strike. All the unions went on strike. Jupiter started killing people when they were on strike. So nobody was buying car stereos. They weren't buying music. Nothing. And we had all this. And I wrote this in my book. I have it in my book. I should have shut everything down but one store. Because I had to buy, when I did my inventory, I had to buy 6 of everything because you had 1 to show, 1 to go, right? So I had to end up doing that. Well, then all of a sudden my shelves looked, because I couldn't afford to buy the inventory. Well, I should have gone in and closed down the DeRidder and Sulphur store and kept Lake Charles, let go of the employees. You hate to do that, but that's what should have happened. And I could have survived that time.
Make the hard decisions.
Yeah, instead of selling my business.
Make the hard decisions. Is
Exactly.
What you're saying.
Those are the things that if I would have, back in those days, I was a little bit more rebellious because I just joined the Baptist church, and one of the guys in my Sunday school class said, you need to sell your businesses because you sell music. So that was what that was. You can kind of appreciate that, but it was one of those things where when I look at people and I see struggling, if I'm in a position where I have an opportunity to talk to people, don't be proud, don't be too humble to back off. If it comes
too
down,
proud to back off.
Hey, too proud to back off. Yeah. You got 20 employees now. I'm one of those guys that I'm going to save those employees as long as I possibly can.
Of course, yeah.
Unfortunately, one of the things that I see nowadays, and especially in the construction business, and we have right to work here, is that these big construction companies will lay you off the day of Christmas. If they don't have work, they lay you off to get that down. It's mean. You don't find that up north. Up north, they tend to be a little bit more, they'll at least give you an hour a week so you can keep your benefits and stuff. We don't do that down here.
Right.
But it's, you don't want to be like that either. And there's a balance on that. But when you sit down and you recognize that nothing's too big.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, all the things that you create, that you control, imagine Jesus. He controls everything. He knows what's going to happen in the front. What better resource would you have? Right. And if he's telling you, look, man, you're not making your bills or you're not doing this, you got to be humble enough to back off. That's my one biggest failure, is that I wasn't that way.
So what's the name of your book?
Oh, it's Increase Your Profit Through Modern Technology. It's a book that I've been writing for 40 years.
Okay, so you haven't published it yet?
No, it's published. I self-publish. It's on my website, www.jorcopublishing.com.
Spell Jorco.
Jorco.
Okay, we'll have it on the bottom down for you guys that want to jump on and get his book. Well, man, I can honestly say this has been a privilege to spend some time with you on the show, and it's definitely been great to getting to know you. I think.
This has been a great chat.
I think it's an amazing opportunity to be able to let people take away. What would be the takeaway you would say for somebody that's listening as an entrepreneur? They're struggling. They're trying to decide. I got 3 stores. I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
I think we've covered a lot. Mentoring is great. If you have somebody you can mentor with, get on your knees.
Make the tough decisions.
Get on your knees and make the tough decisions and turn it up. I tell my son this all the time. I said, when it's too great of a problem that it overwhelms you, turn it over to God. I mean, give it to Jesus.
Yeah.
And then you can back off and get your joy back and let him work it out. Because look, if you're in his graces, he's going to take care of you and he's going to solve the problems. And he's a way better engineer than you are. And that's what I would say. If you're starting your own businesses, everything's a challenge. Everything's a challenge. If you're working for somebody, it's not like that. If you start your own business, everything's a challenge. And I think the best thing you can do is to put Jesus on your side and give him the wheel.
Amen. All right, brother. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, brother. It's been a great having you.
Yeah, man.
Look forward to having you again sometime. Definitely interesting takeaways for sure. You guys check us out on our next podcast. We drop every Wednesday at 7:14 a.m. And we definitely believe that there's a lot more in the future. Stay tenacious.
That's it for this episode of The Tenacious Entrepreneur. Thanks for tuning in and being part of this journey. Are you an entrepreneur with a tenacious story? We want to hear from you. Visit our website, tenaciousentrepreneur.com, and click on the Tell My Story link. If you got something valuable from today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a fellow entrepreneur. Keep pushing forward, and remember, the end is only the beginning. A new episode drops every Wednesday at 7:14 a.m. Until then, remember to stay humble, stay focused, and be tenacious.